I've lived long enough to understand that family can either be your greatest blessing or your deepest wound. When my daughter Claire looked me in the eye and told me I would never see my grandchildren again, it felt like my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. What she didn't know was that the upscale neighborhood she called home, every one of the 36 houses, the community center, and even the park where my grandchildren played, was mine. Life, it seems, has a way of dealing you unexpected cards when you need them most. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. At 72, I had learned that family could be both a blessing and a curse. When my daughter Claire looked me in the eyes and said I would never see my grandchildren again, it felt like my heart shattered. What she didn't realize was that all 36 homes in the Maplewood Ridge subdivision, the community center, and even the park where my grandchildren played, those were mine. I was Eleanor Westbrook, founder of Westbrook Financial Services, a wealth management firm that I had built from the ground up. My late husband Charles had passed 15 years ago, leaving me to run not only our family business but the investments we had amassed. I thrived in the Pacific Northwest, often navigating the rain as it tapped against my window while I sipped Earl Grey tea. My modest home overlooked Maplewood Ridge, a place I had developed nearly 20 years ago, an upscale subdivision I owned through a separate LLC. Claire lived there with her husband Thomas and my 3 grandchildren, Lily, Noah, and Sophie. 7 years ago, I had sold them their house at a discounted rate when Thomas's firm was struggling. Now his architecture firm was booming, but our relationship had begun to unravel. I had never fully understood what had gone wrong, though I'd been trying to bridge the gap for years. That morning, as I scrolled through pictures of Sophie's ballet recital, my phone chimed with a text message from Claire. "Mom, we need to talk. Coming over at 10 o'clock. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. Claire's sudden visit wasn't unusual. Her tone had been harsh for years, but today felt different. She entered my home sharply dressed in a cashmere sweater, her polished exterior masking the tension that had been building between us. "I don't have time for pleasantries," she said, making it clear this wasn't going to be a friendly visit. She began to pace in front of my fireplace. "Thomas and I have decided to set boundaries. You've become a problem in our family dynamics. Your influence on the children is problematic." Problematic. I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm despite the cold feeling settling in my chest. She continued, detailing how I undermined their parenting, buying extravagant gifts, ignoring their dietary rules, and even speaking to Lily about college funds. The list grew longer, each accusation a jab at my very intent, trying to help them succeed in a world that would one day challenge them. "I'm only trying to give them opportunities," I said, my voice trembling with frustration. Claire scoffed. "You're always pushing your agenda, just like you did with me. Always the lessons, the financial security, the achievement. It's suffocating. Just like it suffocated me." Her words stung, more than I could admit. My parenting style had been strict. I'd pushed for independence and ambition. I wanted her to understand the importance of financial security. I'd always been determined that she would be empowered in a world that often worked against women. But as I sat there, I realized the depths of her resentment. She didn't see the tools I had given her, she only saw suffocation. My offer to help, to guide her, had been twisted into control. I looked at her and said, "I never meant to suffocate you. I wanted you to succeed." "Well, I did," she said coldly. "I have the perfect house, the perfect husband, the perfect kids. Now, I just want them to have what I never had, a childhood free from your influence." I fought back the urge to remind her that her perfect life had been built on the foundation I had given her. The house, the trust fund, the clients, all of it. But I held my tongue. It would only fuel her rage. "What exactly do you want from me, Claire?" I asked, my voice quieter now, filled with a sorrow I hadn't expected. "Thomas and I have decided that you need to step back from the children. No more gifts, no more unscheduled visits, no more influence. We're establishing healthy boundaries, for everyone's good." The finality in her words hit me like a physical blow. You would keep me from my grandchildren entirely over some perceived overstepping? I said, struggling to keep my composure. If you can't respect our boundaries, then yes, she replied. We'll reconsider any contact at all. The thought of being erased from their lives felt like a physical ache. I had spent years shaping memories, building traditions, nurturing my relationship with each of them. And now, with a few words, Claire had decided that was no longer allowed. And have you discussed this with the children? I asked, my heart aching. Do they understand why their grandmother is suddenly going to disappear? Claire's hesitation gave me the answer. We'll explain it to them in an age-appropriate way. They'll understand. I bit my tongue. Of course, I said, though I knew their explanation would be an empty one. They would miss me, but they wouldn't understand. Children don't process power plays, they simply feel them. Claire rose to leave, and I realized there was nothing left to say. She was determined, and no amount of pleading would change her mind. As she walked out, she paused and said, "This doesn't have to be permanent, but you need to follow our rules. Otherwise, this will be the last time we talk about it." I stood there, watching her leave, feeling something I hadn't expected. A deep, aching loneliness. She had cut me off from my grandchildren, from my family, and she had done it with a coldness that was almost surgical. As the door shut behind her, I realized that this wasn't just about my grandchildren. It was about power, my place in the family, my autonomy. I had spent decades building a financial empire, and now my own daughter wanted to control it. I wasn't about to let that happen. The days after Claire's visit were a blur of cold planning. I knew I had to act carefully. The visitor restriction policy, disguised as a measure for security and family harmony, was more than just an inconvenience. It was an attempt to isolate me, to limit my influence, to sever the bond one had built with my grandchildren. Claire's words echoed in my head. We're establishing healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries. She had conveniently forgotten that the boundaries I'd set over the years had always been about giving her opportunities, teaching her how to make it on her own. But now, the very things I had given her to succeed, the house, the money, the guidance, were being turned against me. And now she was wielding my own legacy as a weapon. I needed more information, a plan. There was still a chance to fix this without revealing everything. The stakes were higher now than they had ever been. I called my attorney, Audrey Green. Audrey had been with me for years, and her sharp mind and legal acumen had seen me through countless challenges. I need you to look into Claire's plans, I told her when she answered the phone. You suspect she's trying to take control of something, Audrey said, immediately understanding. Yes. I'm certain of it. The visitor restriction policy is just the beginning, and I have reason to believe she's already looking into my finances. Let me see what I can dig up. I'll have something for you soon. In the meantime, I knew I had to prepare. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. My next move was critical. I spent hours reviewing the legal documents Audrey sent, combing through everything that could potentially protect me from Claire's manipulations. There were provisions in the community charter, legal clauses that I had written myself, that would allow me to fight the proposed restrictions. But none of it would matter if Claire had already outmaneuvered me. And there was something about the way she spoke to me that made me realize I wasn't just dealing with a daughter who had outgrown her mother's shadow. No, Claire had a much bigger plan in mind. It was late when I received an unexpected text message from a number I didn't recognize. It was from Diane Abernathy, one of Claire's allies on the Homeowners Association board. Eleanor, I think it's time we met. This situation's getting out of hand. My heart skipped a beat. Could this be someone trying to warn me? Or had Claire's coalition already turned against me? I replied quickly. Where and when? The next afternoon, I met Diane at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town. Her posture was stiff, but her eyes were full of tension. Eleanor, she said, her voice low, I don't know how much longer I can go along with this. Miranda's pushing too hard, and some of us are starting to have second thoughts. I leaned forward, My curiosity piqued. What do you mean? She's been so focused on the visitor restrictions and community control. She's even discussing some changes to the community's bylaws. And frankly, I'm worried about what comes next. I nodded, understanding her unease. What kind of changes? Diane hesitated. She's talking about controlling access to resources, expanding the rules, creating a more exclusive environment, cutting out people who don't fit the profile. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. Exclusion. That was Claire's game plan, to push out everyone who didn't align with her vision of what Oakwood should be. The community I had carefully nurtured, the dream I had worked so hard to build, was at risk of being twisted beyond recognition. I don't know how much longer I can sit back and watch this unfold, Diane said, her voice trembling slightly. I've seen enough to know something's wrong. If you want to stop this, you need to act fast. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing the weight of her words. It was clear now that I wasn't just fighting for my relationship with my grandchildren. I was fighting for the soul of Oakwood Estates itself. This wasn't just about Claire's plans. It was about something much bigger. Thank you for coming forward, Diane, I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. I'll need your help. That night, as I sat at my desk surrounded by maps and legal documents, I received a call from Audrey. Eleanor, I've been going over everything, she said, her voice tight with urgency. Claire's been making inquiries into your financial assets, specifically your LLC that owns Oakwood Estates. I felt my stomach drop. She's not just trying to control the children. She's after everything. I need to be ready for whatever she has planned, I replied, forcing my voice to remain calm. We can't let her get away with this. I'll handle the legal side, Audrey assured me. You focus on the meeting. It's time to expose Claire's tactics and show the community the truth. The morning of the homeowners' meeting arrived quickly. I could feel the tension in the air as I drove into Oakwood Estates. The streets were lined with cars, many of them from residents who rarely attended meetings. Word had spread. I had prepared for this moment for weeks, and now I needed to show everyone that this wasn't just about Claire's personal vendetta against me. It was about protecting the community I had built, a community that valued inclusion, that was open to families of all kinds, and that didn't discriminate based on income or status. The room was already filling up when I arrived. I glanced around, noting the familiar faces of long-time residents, people who had once supported my vision for Oakwood Estates, people who had helped me make it a reality. They were all here, watching to see what would unfold. Claire arrived with Thomas and the children, their faces guarded. Emma and Noah glanced around nervously, but Sophie was clutching Thomas's hand, clearly uncomfortable. I could feel the weight of their presence, but I wouldn't let it sway me. This wasn't just about my relationship with them. This was about something bigger. As the meeting began, I watched Claire take her place at the front of the room, her gaze locked on me. She was ready to fight. Richard Chon, a fellow board member, stood up to introduce the visitor restriction policy. He spoke about the need to protect the community and preserve property values, his words echoing Claire's talking points. But then, when the floor was opened for discussion, I stood. I am Eleanor Westbrook, I began, my voice steady but resolute, and I've been part of this community since its inception. For 20 years, Oakwood Estates has thrived because it is inclusive and supportive of families, of all kinds. I could see Claire's jaw tighten, but I pressed on. The visitor restriction policy is a direct contradiction of what this community stands for. It threatens our relationships, particularly those between grandparents and their grandchildren. We cannot allow ourselves to be swayed by fear or vague claims about security. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. This policy also violates the core principles that Oakwood Estates was built on. We cannot let it pass. The room was silent for a moment. Then, murmurs began to rise. The community was listening. I knew I had struck a chord. As I turned to sit down, Claire's icy glare met mine, but I knew I had made my point. This was no longer just a battle between mother and daughter. This was a fight for the future of Oakwood Estates, and I wasn't going to back down. The evening after the homeowners' meeting, I found myself sitting in the quiet of my study, the weight of the day settling in. The victory felt hollow. Yes, the visitor restriction policy had been tabled, but that was just one battle. The war with Claire was far from over. I couldn't help but think about what she'd said earlier, about wanting autonomy and control. Everything I'd ever done for her, the help with her career, the support during difficult times, was now being twisted into something ugly. I had always tried to empower her, to give her the tools to succeed. But now, all she saw was control. That night, I received a message from Thomas, Claire's husband. It was short, but it carried a weight that I couldn't ignore. "I know what you're doing, Eleanor. I know what's at stake. We need to talk." It wasn't unexpected. Thomas had always been more of a quiet presence in their marriage, not one to pick sides in their arguments. But I knew that behind his reserved demeanor was a man who, if pushed too far, might see through Claire's facade. I dialed his number, my fingers tight on the phone. "Thomas, it's Eleanor." "Eleanor," he replied, his voice sounding tired but not unfriendly. "You've made your point today. But I think you and I both know that Claire isn't going to back down. She has the support she needs for the next step." I took a breath. "I'm not trying to control anything, Thomas. I'm trying to preserve what we all have here. Oakwood Estates wasn't just a neighborhood, it was supposed to be a community. And that includes everyone, not just Claire's vision of who belongs." He was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, it was clear he was carefully weighing his words. "I know. But Claire sees it differently. She's consumed by the idea that you've always been the one with the power. You always did things your way, and she's had enough of it." The words stung more than I expected. I hadn't realized just how deeply my actions had been perceived as control. I had tried to be there for her, to guide her, but maybe I had overstepped in ways I hadn't seen. "I never intended to overshadow her," I said quietly, "but I can't let her turn everything into something I no longer recognize." "I know," Thomas said again, his voice softening. "But listen, Eleanor. Claire is planning to make a move. A big one. She's arranging a meeting with the Oakwood Property Group for Friday." I felt my pulse quicken. "A meeting?" "Yes," he confirmed. "She thinks she can convince them to take control of the development. She's got a new proposal, something that could change the entire direction of Oakwood Estates. I'm just letting you know so you can be prepared." I closed my eyes, taking in the enormity of his words. Claire had moved beyond just trying to control her own family. Now she was targeting the very foundations of Oakwood Estates. "My creation. Thank you for telling me, Thomas." "I'll be ready," I said, my voice steely with determination. "Just don't be too hard on her," he added, his voice small. "She's my wife, Eleanor. I've been trying to support her, even if I don't agree with everything she's doing. I don't want to lose her. And I don't want you to lose your grandchildren, either." I exhaled slowly. "I'm trying to protect them, Thomas. But this is bigger than just her. I can't let her destroy everything we've built." "I know," he replied quietly. "I know." The next morning, as I sat at the kitchen table, I prepared for the meeting with the Oakwood Property Group. Audrey had already warned me to expect Claire to present a well-crafted proposal, one that would present her vision as the only reasonable path forward for the neighborhood. But I had my own cards to play. The documents Audrey had found were crucial. Details that could show Claire's attempts to mislead the property group. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. If Claire wanted to fight me for control, she would have to face me head-on, not from the shadows. By the time Friday rolled around, I felt more prepared than ever. The meeting was scheduled for late morning at the Oakwood Property Group's downtown office. I arrived with Audrey and Diane, who had agreed to attend as witnesses, though I knew they couldn't openly take sides in this delicate situation. The sleek, modern office was cold and impersonal, the kind of place that felt like a waiting room for the wealthy and powerful. Claire was already there, seated at a polished conference table, looking every bit the confident, ambitious woman she'd become. I took a seat across from her, my posture calm and composed. The tension between us was palpable, but I wasn't going to let her see how much her actions had hurt me. Not now. You look surprised to see me, Claire said, her voice laced with that same control she always tried to wield. I'm not surprised at all, I replied coolly, meeting her gaze. I knew you would try to take this to the next level. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm trying to protect Oakwood, Eleanor. What you've built here is important, but it's become a liability. The community needs to evolve, to grow. By excluding people? I asked, raising an eyebrow. By changing the very essence of what Oakwood stands for? You've built something, yes. But now it's time to move forward. We can't stay stuck in the past, she said, her voice almost pleading now. The neighborhood needs to be protected from people like you. People who think they know best. I leaned forward, meeting her words head-on. If you think what I've built is a liability, Claire, then you've missed the point entirely. Oakwood was always meant to be a place where people, real people, could come together. But what you're trying to do is turn it into an exclusive, gated community where no one but your kind is welcome. And I won't let that happen. Claire's eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she handed me a packet of documents. This is my proposal for the future of Oakwood Estates, she said, her voice icy. I suggest you look it over. You'll see that I've thought of everything. I took the packet, feeling the weight of it in my hands. As I glanced over the documents, I saw the familiar language, terms I had written myself, now twisted into something I barely recognized. You've made a mistake, Claire, I said, my voice calm. This isn't about protecting Oakwood. It's about controlling it. And I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for. She stared at me, her gaze cold, before her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You may not have a choice. You're no longer in control, Eleanor. I am. I'm not so sure about that, I replied. But I'll tell you this much, if you want to take Oakwood, you'll have to go through me. And I won't let you win. Claire's smile faltered for a moment before she regained her composure. We'll see, she said softly. But remember, Eleanor, you're not the only one who can build things. I stood up slowly, my resolve hardening. And you're not the only one who can destroy them, Claire. I turned and walked out of the room, knowing the battle was far from over. But I had made one thing clear. I wasn't going to back down. The drive back home felt like a blur, the tension of the meeting with Claire still clinging to my skin like a thick fog. The quiet hum of the car's engine seemed distant as I tried to process everything that had happened. Claire's confidence was unsettling. She truly believed she was in control, but what she didn't realize was that I had all the leverage. The Oakwood Property Group had always been mine, my vision from the start. I hadn't just built the community with money. I had built it with care, with thought, with intention. And now, I was watching as my daughter, the one I had worked so hard to empower, was trying to tear it all down for her own gain. By the time I arrived home, it was nearly dusk. The streets of Oakwood Estates were quiet, the usual chatter of children playing replaced by the ominous silence that hung over the entire neighborhood. I could feel it, the weight of the coming confrontation, the inevitability of it all. Claire wasn't going to back down, and neither was I. I walked through my front door, finding a momentary peace in the familiar comfort of my home. But even here, I couldn't escape the tension. Just as I was about to call Audrey for an update, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Thomas. She's planning to go public with the meeting tomorrow. She's already contacted the press. My heart skipped a beat. Claire was willing to escalate this publicly? She hadn't just learned how to manipulate behind closed doors. Now, she was preparing to drag me through the mud in front of the entire community. I sat down at the kitchen table, taking a deep breath. I had to remain calm, but the anger was bubbling beneath the surface. Claire had crossed a line. She wasn't just trying to control her life anymore. She was now attacking my reputation, my legacy. I composed myself and texted Thomas back. Thank you for letting me know. I'll be prepared. Minutes later, Audrey called. How'd it go? She asked, the concern in her voice clear. Bad, I replied shortly. She's going public tomorrow, contacting the media. She's willing to do whatever it takes to make her narrative stick. Audrey sighed. I was afraid of that. She's going all in, isn't she? Yes, she is, I said, my voice tight. But she's underestimating me. I'm not going to let her use the press to control this situation. We both fell silent for a moment, the weight of the coming storm settling between us. We need to act fast, I finally said. If Claire wants to make this a public issue, then I'll meet her head-on. But I need to control the narrative. Audrey hesitated. What are you thinking? I'm going to meet with the press first, I said, my mind working quickly. I'll go public before she can spin her version of the story. I'll make sure they know the truth about Oakwood Estates, about my involvement, and about the community I built. And I'll make it clear that I won't let her tear it apart. Audrey was quiet for a moment, considering. You're sure about this? More than ever, I said firmly. If Claire wants to make this a battle for control, then I'll fight back. But I'm not fighting her, I'm fighting for Oakwood. The next morning, I woke early, determined to act before Claire could turn the media against me. The press was already buzzing with news of the homeowners' meeting, and I knew that the narrative would quickly be shaped by whoever spoke first. I called a press conference at the Oakwood Estates Community Center, just a few hours before Claire's planned media event. The location was symbolic. It was where it all started, and where it would all be decided. By the time the reporters arrived, I was already there, standing in front of the podium, my posture resolute. I glanced over at Audrey, who gave me an encouraging nod. She was my quiet strength, the one who had always been by my side. As the cameras started rolling, I stepped up to the microphone, meeting the eyes of the reporters who had gathered. I could feel Claire's looming presence, even though she wasn't there. She would be watching this, and I needed her to know I wasn't afraid. Thank you for coming, I began, my voice calm and controlled. I've called this press conference today because there have been rumors circulating about the future of Oakwood Estates, and I want to set the record straight. This community was built with a vision of inclusivity, support, and family. It was built by me, for families like mine. It is not a commodity to be bought, sold, or controlled by a few. It's a place where people of all backgrounds can come together and thrive. I could see the reporters scribbling notes, the camera flashes reflecting off their lenses. I know there are those who believe that change is necessary, I continued, my gaze unwavering. But change for the sake of power, control, and exclusion is not the kind of change this community needs. And I will fight with every ounce of my being to protect the vision I've created. I paused, letting the words sink in. I understand the desire for autonomy, for independence. But there's a difference between asserting control over a community and dismantling everything that has been built. My daughter, Claire, has her own vision. But it is not Oakwood's vision. And I will not allow her to use her position to manipulate or exclude anyone from this community. A murmur rippled through the room, the tension palpable. I could see Claire's allies in the back, their eyes narrowed, clearly waiting for her rebuttal. But I had struck first. I am Eleanor, the creator of Oakwood Estates, I concluded. And I will not let anyone destroy the heart of what we've built here. Not for the sake of power, not for the sake of profit, and not for the sake of control. Oakwood will remain a community, a home for everyone, not just for those who think they belong. Thank you. With that, I stepped away from the podium, the cameras flashing wildly as the reporters began shouting questions. But I didn't stop. I had said what needed to be said. The world knew the truth now. The fallout was immediate. Claire had no choice but to respond, but I had already taken the upper hand. Her press event was delayed as she scrambled to respond to my statement. And as the day wore on, the media began to pick up on the discrepancies in her narrative. The community was beginning to rally around me. By the time the meeting with the property group rolled around that afternoon, the power dynamics had shifted. Claire had lost her advantage. The press, the community, and the board were now looking at her with suspicion. When I entered the room for the meeting, I felt the weight of what had been accomplished. Claire may have thought she was in control, but I had proven that there was more to this battle than she had imagined. Oakwood Estates wasn't hers to reshape. It belonged to the community. And now, she would have to face the consequences of trying to tear it apart. The day of the meeting with the Oakwood Property Group arrived faster than I expected. By then, the press conference had already stirred the pot, and the community was buzzing with opinions. Claire had been forced to shift her tactics, but I knew that she wasn't going to give up. In fact, if anything, her determination had only grown stronger after my public confrontation. She had underestimated me, underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect what I had built. As I made my way to the conference room of the Oakwood Property Group headquarters, the weight of the situation pressed on me. This meeting wasn't just about policy anymore. It was about something much bigger. It was about the power dynamics in Oakwood Estates, and about my daughter's belief that she could simply override everything I had established. When I arrived, the boardroom was filled with a mixture of the familiar faces from the Homeowners Association and a few unfamiliar ones. Investors, executives from the property group, and advisors. They all greeted me politely, but I could see the tension in their eyes. They knew why I was here. They knew what Claire had planned, and they had already seen the public fallout from my press conference. I sat down at the head of the table, my gaze sweeping over the group. The murmurs died down, and the atmosphere became heavier with each passing second. I could feel Claire's presence even though she wasn't there yet. She had orchestrated this meeting, convinced that her vision for the future of Oakwood Estates was the right one. But it was my vision that had guided this community from the beginning, and I wasn't going to let her destroy it. The door opened, and Claire walked in. She was alone, no Patrick, no children this time. The anger in her eyes was unmistakable, but so was the faint crack in her otherwise polished facade. She knew she was losing ground, and she was desperate to turn the tide. As she approached the table, her gaze flicked toward me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of hesitation in her step. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the same determined professionalism she had wielded at the homeowners' meeting. "Thank you all for gathering," Claire said smoothly as she took a seat, offering a thin smile to the room. "I know that this situation has been less than ideal, but I believe that today we can find a solution that will benefit the community as a whole." I glanced around the room at the faces of the board members. They were watching us closely, waiting to see how the dynamic would unfold. I had no intention of letting Claire control the narrative here. "Claire, I appreciate your willingness to discuss the future of Oakwood Estates," I began, my voice steady. "But we both know that the real question is not about policy. The real question is whether we can truly create a vision for this community that aligns with our values, or if this is about personal control." Claire's jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. She was clearly holding back, but I wasn't done. "I built Oakwood Estates from the ground up," I continued, my tone growing firmer. "I envisioned a place where families of all backgrounds could live together, where generations could grow old and thrive. I didn't build it to be a commodity, or a playground for a few to dictate how others should live. And I certainly didn't build it to be torn apart by someone with an agenda." Claire's face flushed a deep red, but she didn't back down. "I'm trying to protect this community," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I'm trying to ensure that we move forward, that we evolve, and that we remain financially secure. This place, this development, isn't sustainable in its current form." I knew she was speaking in the language of progress, of change, of growth. But I also knew that what she was proposing would destroy the very spirit of Oakwood Estates. "No, Claire," I said quietly. "What you're proposing isn't progress. It's exclusion. It's division. And it's going to hurt people who have called this place home for decades. You want to make it exclusive. You want to create a space where only the right kind of people can live. But that's not the legacy I've worked for." Claire's eyes narrowed, and she opened her mouth to retort, but I raised my hand, signaling her to stop. "I've listened to your arguments," I said, my voice cold now. "And I've heard your complaints. But the truth is, this community was never meant to cater to a few. It was meant to serve many. The visitor restriction policy, the selective renovation plans, these aren't solutions, they're power grabs. And I will not stand by and let you turn Oakwood into something it was never meant to be." Claire was visibly shaken now, her carefully constructed walls starting to crumble. She glanced at the other board members, looking for support, but they were silent, waiting for someone to make the next move. "Let's be clear about one thing, Claire," I said, my voice steady and final. "I don't need to control this community. I never have. But I will protect it. If you want to fight for your vision, then you can do that, but you won't do it by using me, or this family, or this community as your battleground. If it means revealing everything, I will." There was no immediate response. The room was frozen in tension, and I could feel the shift in the air. The other board members were looking at Claire now, waiting for her to respond. And Claire, for the first time in this entire process, was unsure. "Are you threatening me?" Claire's voice was tight, almost strangled with frustration. "No," I said, my tone calm. "I'm simply telling you that I won't stand by while you destroy what I've spent my life building." I turned to the board members, who had been quiet throughout the exchange. "I have always worked to create a community where everyone feels welcome, where family matters more than wealth, and where we protect the values we believe in. That's what Oakwood Estates stands for. And I will not allow that vision to be twisted by anyone." One of the board members, a woman I recognized from several meetings, finally spoke up. "We've heard the concerns on both sides," she said carefully. "But I think it's clear that the community is divided. Perhaps it's time we step back and take a longer look at these proposals." There was a murmur of agreement among the other members. Claire looked around the room, her face growing even more red with anger. She could see that she was losing this battle. "I'll agree to reconsider the visitor policy," Claire said through gritted teeth. "But know this isn't over." I met her gaze directly. "It will never be over, Claire, not until we find a way to make this work for everyone. But if you continue down this path, you won't just lose Oakwood Estates, you'll lose your family." I could see the coldness in Claire's eyes. I had struck a nerve. And for the first time in this entire battle, I felt like I had won. The meeting ended shortly after that, with the board members agreeing to table Claire's proposals for further discussion. As I left the room, I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The battle wasn't over yet, there were still many obstacles ahead, but for now, Oakwood Estates was safe. And Claire's grip on the community, on her power, had loosened just a little bit more. But I knew that the next few days, the next few weeks, would be crucial. Claire was still determined. And so was I. And this time, I wasn't backing down.